Thanks for staying up later. We spent last night talking with Norman Lear about his creation, All in the Family. Now on to other topics. Maude was one of the first spin-off shows. She had come into Archie Bunker's life on All in the Family, spins off, gets her own show, and very often her insistently liberal viewpoint could be as preposterous as Archie's bigotry on the other side.
That was the intention, to do what we called a horse liberal, just to deliver one horse liberal the way he was as a conservative, not really responsible for learning what the hell he was talking about or what she was talking about. Also thought that of Mike, as a matter of fact.
There's so many episodes we could talk about, but I guess the one real milestone in Maude was the abortion episode. She gets pregnant in her mid-40s. She's going to have an abortion. And we got to remember, this is sometime in the early to mid-70s. That didn't go down so well with a lot of the affiliates and obviously a lot of viewers.
Well, that was, by the time it went into reruns, everybody was alerted to it. They knew what was coming. It was difficult the first time out, but by the time of reruns, the opposition was so well organized, they were lying down in front of my car, in front of William Paley's car, Robert Wood, who was the president of the network, and there was a lot of carrying on, but the network went with it. They ran them.
Some affiliates canceled the show, though, didn't they?
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking about when you say the Maude episode, the one for me was Maude, the best acting job I can remember on television was Beatrice Arthur alone, one woman for a half an hour, talking to a psychiatrist. All you saw was the back of his head and a piece of his hand, his arm, and she was moving around this place and lying on a couch and so forth. And we were talking about my father last night, and the kind of character he was. She was talking, turning 50, about how she felt, it raised memories of her parents and so forth, and why she was who she was and her problems in life. And she was talking about her father, whom she disliked, and in the course of this half hour, she remembered an incident. And she told the story and sobbed, telling that story, a story when he was a hero to her. And in the course of that sobbing retelling of the story, she found this enormous love for her father. This was something that had happened with me. I always thought, for reasons of my father's, I thought I had great problems with him that made me made him hard to love. And then one day I remembered I was, I guess, 16 and a half, 17 years old, and I was taking my favorite girl. We lived in Hartford, Connecticut. We were driving to Westport, Connecticut, to see my favorite play, which was Lilium. And Tyrone Power, who was a huge star at that time, and his wife, who was a huge star, Annabella, were playing in Frank Molnar's Lilium at the Westwood Playhouse. I couldn't, in a zillion years, overstate the romance of that evening. My father was going to give me his car, which was a Hudson Terraplane, and to drive to. So I had to pick Charlotte up in West Hartford and drive to Westport. And 5 o'clock comes, or whatever time, and he's not there, 5:15, 5:30. I finally have to take a Model A Ford that I owned with another guy and race out to West Hartford and pick her up and get on the Boston Post Road to Westport. And at New Haven, it turned into the Merritt Parkway. And so it's these dinky roads all the way to New Haven and finally on the Merritt Parkway. And I'm on the Merritt Parkway about 3 minutes and I hear a honk, honk, honk. My father had come home about 20 minutes after I left and had gotten in the Hudson Terraplane and raced all the way through Berlin and Meriden and Middletown and Wallingford and onto the Merritt Parkway and found me and changed cars. And when I remembered that, I just went bonkers. And so the story that a lovely writer wrote out of those ingredients, I wish I could remember his name to mention him, was that story. But with another incident that would more fit a young woman in high school.
Sunday Dinner, I guess, is in part autobiographical too, right?
It is in part, yeah. I wouldn't know how else to write. There isn't anything I could possibly do that wouldn't have pieces of me, even in some of the female characters, or pieces of other people I know and love. We did One Day at a Time, and I was raising daughters, and I scraped the barrels of all of our lives, you know, for that. And so did every other writer contributing to the show. I mean, that's what we learned to do, was to look hard at what was happening in our own lives and in our newspapers.
In Sunday Dinner, Robert Loggia is this guy who I guess is in his mid-50s, winds up marrying a young girl, right. 30, 31 years old. Or
somebody 26 years younger than he.
Well, it's your own life, right?
It parallels my own life, indeed. I'm a little older than Robert Loggia, but there's a 25-year discrepancy in my marriage. And I mean, I use that. I also have a couple of daughters. He has a couple of daughters. I don't have a son. He has a son. One daughter's a microbiologist in the show. I don't have a daughter who's a scientist. I mean, you know, you write about what you know best.
Tell me about how Danny Thomas played a role in your first big break.
11 stories come crashing to mind.
You bluffed your way in to see him somehow, didn't you? You proposed as a reporter or something?
I had an idea for Danny Thomas. I called, I knew his agency was the William Morris office. I called the William Morris office, talking breathlessly, got a secretary on the phone, and couldn't reach the agent, but I had her on the phone. And I said, my name is Merle Robinson. I always used Merle Robinson. If Merle Robinson is alive and well now, and I pray you are, Merle, he was a kid I knew when we were 7, 8 years old. I loved his name. And from the day I went into the Army and was stopped by an MP or ever needed to give a phony name or something, I've used Merle Robinson. So on his phone, I said...
The stuff this guy has been blamed for.
This is Merle Robinson of the New York Times. I've been out here for 2 days talking to Danny Thomas. I'm doing a story. I'll be writing it on the plane on the way back. I'm at the airport now. I'll be filing it. They're calling my plane. I've got 2 quick questions for him. Yes, could you give me that? And she gave me the telephone number. So I called Danny Thomas. He had an accompanist by the name of Wally Pop, as I remember, and it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon, something like that, and they were working. Well, as he told me, what is this, kid? I said, I've got a piece of material for you. Who the hell are you? How'd you find me? I told him how I found him. He liked that, so he wanted to listen. He said, look, he said, we're working right now. He said, in 2 nights, I'm going to do something at Ciro's at a Friars event. They know all my material, all those people. If I can find something, I said, how long should it be? If I can find something that runs 5 minutes, 6 minutes, I said, that's exactly what this runs, 5, 6 minutes. He said, where'd you say you were? I said, I'm in Hollywood. He said, give me the address in Beverly Hills. He said, get over here right away. I said, oh, God, I can't. It's going to take me about 2.5 hours. I won't be able to get there till about 7:30. He said, I thought you said you were in Hollywood. I hadn't written it. This was just an idea I'd never expected. Anyway, he said, if you're not here by 7:30, forget it, so forth. So sat down and wrote this thing and then chased out to Danny Thomas. And he loved it. He loved it. And he did it for years.
So now, by way of shorthand, Danny Thomas has been impressed by this story that you've given him, and he set you up on the Colgate Comedy Hour, right?
He delivers it at the Friars Club. And in the audience was a young agent from New York who was in town for the evening, who sees it. And his name was David Susskind, who was working for MCA at the time. And he goes backstage and says to Danny Thomas, who wrote that piece of material? He said, I don't know, a couple of young guys, Ed Simmons and Norman Lear. He said, who? Ed Simmons and Norman Lear. He said, Norman Lear? I said, I got a cousin named Norman Lear. And he called the next morning. He didn't even know, we hadn't seen each other in 12 years or something. He didn't even know I was living in, but it was my cousin, my first cousin, who was an agent.
Not the same Norman Lear.
It was the same Norman Lear. He was David Susskind.
Oh, but David Susskind was your first cousin?
Yes.
Oh, all right,
yes,
okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm a little slow on the uptake.
Anyway, but he didn't know that I was even living in California, let alone caring to write, because we were not close. So the next thing I knew, I had an offer to go back. Eddie and I had an offer to go back and write the Jack Haley Ford, F-O-R-D, Star Review. Jack Haley was in television and was having difficulty. We wrote 2 of those shows. Jerry Lewis saw one of them, whatever evening that was on, and said, I want those guys for the Colgate Comedy Hour. They were just coming on television.
Martin and Lewis.
Yeah. So we joined Martin and Lewis after just writing a couple of the Jack Haley shows.
Fast forward, I guess, a few years later, you've written the screenplay for Come Blow Your Horn, and you can't get Sinatra to read the script. You're convinced Sinatra's the guy. How did you eventually get him to sit down and read it? Tried
everything under the sun. It was called, the first screenplay was called Cock-a-Doodle-Doo, from a play that was called One Shoe Off. It was the birth of a kid coming out of his cock-a-doodle-doo, waking up in the morning. So we sent him a case, whatever you call it, of roosters.
Well, that'll sway a guy every time. You know, he's sitting at home, a case of roosters arrives.
This was just to get his attention. It wasn't to tell him how adorable he was, just to get his attention. We sent a Marine band down the street. We had a skywriter. I mean, I have to say, this was over a long period of time. He was always going to read the script, and he didn't. And he was going to read it, and then he didn't. He was going to read it, and then he didn't. And finally, after, I bet, 10 months, and Howard Koch, who's an important producer in town, was working with him and headed up Paramount later, was working with Frank at the time, and he was trying very hard to get him to read the script. He would never read the script. So one day, Bud Yorkin and I, who was then my partner, decided to send him a reading kit to help him read. So we had a truck back up. We set a rug down in the back of this big truck. We put a easy chair and an ottoman in one corner. We put a standing lamp. We had an album of Jackie Gleason's music to read by on a coffee table. We had an ashtray and a pipe. We had a smoking jacket for comfortable reading.
On Sinatra's lawn.
We had slippers. This was in the back of the truck. Told the truck drivers, take the longest cord you can possibly have, because if you can't get it in the house or on a porch or something, leave it on a lawn, but make sure the lights are on, because this was in the late afternoon. They were going to get there around dusk. Make sure there's a light, the light over is on. So they came back and said it was absolutely beautiful. It was just beautiful. We had it on the lawn right next to the house. The whole room was laid out there. And as we were leaving, it was dark. And nobody was home, by the way. As we were leaving, it was dark, and the light was on. And when he gets home, it's going to be a knockout. I don't hear the next day, and I don't hear for 2 days. I don't hear for 4 days. I don't hear for... And then I call his agent, and I am absolutely livid. And I said, there's no way if we knew each other we could possibly work together. I mean, any guy that could be so callous as not to react to this just hasn't got a sense of... I don't know, I was crazy. And the agent said, something's wrong. Something is wrong here. Let me get back to you, because that is just hilarious.
You drive by his house, and Jilly Rizzo is sitting in the chair reading the script.
So, Jilly was in New York at the time. We checked. We made sure he was watching his restaurant very carefully. He called back several days later and said, Norman, you're never going to believe what happened. He said, Frank was away Palm Springs or something, was coming back in a few days. The help was out for the afternoon and evening or something. When they came back, they saw all this stuff and they thought it was some kind of delivery. They folded up the rug and they put it in the garage. They put the smoking jacket in the closet. They put the music to read by away. They put everything away. And Sinatra came home and found a couple of those things. The smoking jacket he didn't really remember buying, but he didn't remember buying a lot of things. And then when he heard it, what had happened, he thought it was hilarious, and he finally read the script.
And immediately liked it, evidently.
And did it. And by then it was called Come Blow Your Horn, just like the play.
A show that you still see nowadays somewhere on cable is Fernwood Tonight. This show cracks me up almost every time I see it. And
you took a couple of the chairs from there.
I guess we stole them and had them reupholstered. I mean, some of the stuff that would happen on that show, bad child dancers, supposed televised executions, but the wife of the condemned man is trying to make a profit selling T-shirts on television, or 8x10 glass. I mean, the most savagely funny parodies of every moronic social convention, every talk show cliche. I mean, Martin Mull and Fred Willard were all over this.
They were sensational. A couple of my favorites were the concert pianist in the Iron Lung, who played this way. But it was early on, where in this little town of Fernwood, they had never seen a Jew. And one had been stopped with a traffic ticket, had to spend a night in jail. And the studio and the chief of police had arranged, if the guy would do it, to give him a couple of hours to come on the show.
So this would be an actual sighting of a Jew.
Yes. So they had a sighting, and they had speak to a Jew. If you'd like to speak to a Jew and ask him anything, you could speak to the Jew. so we did that. And he was asked these difficult questions, what's it like?
Martin Mull was so great with this deadpan stuff that he did. I'm guessing a certain portion of the audience, maybe not the regular viewers, because the regulars had to be hip to it, but a certain portion that just kind of wandered in and wandered out had to believe that what they were seeing was real, and you must have gotten some great mail from those people.
I think so. It was the same thing with Mary Hartman. Some people just watched the show because the drama was what's going to happen to her next, and others. I love things that play on those two levels, and others understood some of the subtleties and found it funny. A lot of people watched who did not find it funny, just interesting.
Norman Lear's Sunday Dinner, starring Robert Loggia, premieres on CBS at 8 Eastern Time on June the 2nd, followed by, the very next half hour, classic reruns of the old All in the Family series. Time for us to take our leave. We'll see you later.
Accommodations furnished by the Universal City Hilton and Towers. Make your next stay in Los Angeles a memorable one with our spacious rooms, international cuisine, and the attention of a friendly, experienced staff.